Hey, and welcome to the current session of Academic Crisis Line. Today we're going to talk about why you should do a postdoc, why it's fun to do a postdoc, and how to make sure that your postdoc is actually a fun experience. And I welcome my guest for today, my good friend Jo, currently in Paris. Jo is currently doing her second postdoc now on her own grant, so she can talk a lot about this. And we can also talk about the job market in Europe, the US, as well as Japan. So this is pretty interesting. As usual, if you have questions, tweet me at phdial. If you have questions or want to discuss something afterwards, you can email me. You can also email me if you have general complaints or suggestions for future sessions, or if you would like to be involved in future sessions of the Academic Crisis Line. And of course, if you want more information about me or my research or this series, you find more information on my website, storiesandthebrain.com. So, yeah.
Let's start.
So why do you think why you should do a postdoc? Many people are very, very disillusioned after doing their PhD or in the last year of their PhD, and it's a very frustrating experience, especially finishing up. And many of my friends sadly turned their backs to academia and decided that they want to go out and can't handle the stress. I had these thoughts.
Which is a good thing to go out, but not for the wrong reasons, right?
This is very true. Yeah. So, I had exactly the same thoughts, and I thought before I commit to a different career path, I at least do a 1 or 2 year postdoc and see if this is really nothing for me or not. And I'm so glad I did it because I love it, and it's so much better than the PhD because you're much more independent. If things go wrong or you actually don't get along with your supervisors or your lab or you don't find a topic interesting, you just get a new one and you don't jeopardize your degree.
Yes, and it does make it, although of course you have to think about your faculty position afterwards, it does make a big difference that you don't have this looming deadline of 3 years funding for a PhD above you.
Yeah, very true. And then you, of course, have much more freedom because you already have the skills. So all this very frustrating and cumbersome acquisition and learning procedure of basic skills and how to write an article and how to get your writing done or general how to manage your stuff, you already have all these skills. So the learning experience is much more fruitful because now you can focus on skills which actually bring you further and you don't have to learn the basics anymore. So this is really nice.
That's true. I also wrote down as a point that I wanted to say you're much better at what you're doing, so it's much more fun, which is true. And also, I mean, because usually you go for a postdoc in a different lab from where you were before, and you should not forget that it's a completely new environment. So whatever went wrong before might be much better in your postdoc, and we will also later on give you some advice on how you can make sure that this is actually the case.
One thing which is crucial, I think, for picking a good postdoc or knowing which one to choose or where to go is really knowing what you want to get out of it. For me, it was really, I wanted to work in a different environment for a while and with different people. And also, I wanted to broaden my skill set and learn new things.
Yes. For me, it was more about learning, really, I switched topic a little bit. So I thought quite a bit about what I want to do in my postdoc and also about the things that I did not like so much about my PhD. And for instance, one thing I did not like so much was that my research topic was very far from application in a sense. So I was really doing very basic research about how babies learn speech sounds. And it was something, and I think many people that leave academia, for instance, it bothers them that the research is so far removed from society. And I think everyone has this experience where they go into a bar and they're like, what are you doing? And then, you know, they turn away after half a minute because it sounds kind of not accessible to them. So I really wanted to change my topic. Now I do research on how the social environment impacts babies, which for me is much more easy to tie into practical societal challenges. So this was one big decision for me, that I will only do a postdoc if I can change my topic in a meaningful way for me.
Mm-hmm. For me, one of the main motivations to go to the lab I'm currently in was that I wanted to work in a group where people work on more related topics and not everybody has their little island expertise and island topic. Yeah. because I felt a little too isolated with everybody else working on completely different topics. And I wanted to work more in a group and more in a team with people and collaborate more.
Yeah. And I think really just like changing your skill set, I mean, expanding your skill set is good anyways, but changing, for instance, what method you work with or changing topic like I do, it's really not too late to do that in a postdoc, right? Because whatever you did before will still count a lot and actually will make you a better expert on your new topic because you have you can think a bit out of the box. And postdoc is definitely never too late to change topics, so don't be afraid of that.
Yeah, and I also must admit that after I did my PhD in Europe, I actually didn't consider the US broadly as a place to do my postdoc. I was very afraid to go that far away, and the only reason why I was open to this experience is that I had a really good click with my current PI, and I liked the group a lot, and I really felt that this is a good job and that this really fits my needs. But it was the only job in the US I applied for, and I didn't even check the job adverts for other jobs here in the US. So as we said, like I think one thing you have to be aware of, what you have to consider is where you want to go, right, in your research, so skill set, topic, and another set of things you should think about is, well, what kind of environment fits you? And I think this is very important, and I think this is a reason why PhD students sometimes end up a bit miserable, because it's very hard to understand what an academic environment looks like and what you have to pay attention to. But I think after your 3 to 5 year PhD, you will have a much better idea of what makes you happy in your environment and what does not. And please try to choose an environment that makes you happy and productive. And so, I think one thing, for instance, you have to consider is whether you, like Franziska just said, whether you want to work with a group that is rather big and everyone works on the same question and you have a lot of chances to collaborate, or whether you would actually, for instance, I for my postdoc went into a rather small lab, which means that actually there's not so many people to exchange with in the end was not really something that I liked that much. But when I went into it, and I think it was also good, was the reasoning that, of course, my advisor was much more focused on what I was doing as opposed to having to advise 10 to 15 people. So it's really a choice that you have to make, and to see what is actually good for you and what will make you happy and productive. Yeah, this is very true. And also, I know that some people are more geographically restricted and don't have that much opportunity to explore the world, but if you can do it, this is probably the last time in your life where you're really completely flexible, and or one of the later phases in your life where the world is open to you. And I'm glad that I made the jump and actually moved across a different continent, rather than just staying in a geographically much more confined region. And I'm so glad I did this. This experience was very valuable to me and still is. So I never anticipated that I actually like it that much. But of course, if you have family or your partner is not as flexible in their choice where they can go, this is much more difficult. But generally, with what we're going to talk about next, with knowing your market and how to find the right jobs, should also apply whether you want to go abroad or not.
Yeah. Also, even if you go abroad and far away, you might think, oh, everything is new, but actually it's not. Because usually you work in a rather restricted academic field. And for instance, Franziska and I, we did our PhD at the same institution. And a few years later, by chance, we ended up at the same university in the US. So, there's really everywhere I've been to, and I think I've been in 4 countries by now, there's always someone you know from before.
This is very true.
Yeah. Can't get rid of them.
Nope.
Yeah. Maybe a last thing about what you have to consider before you maybe go into your search in a more targeted way is whether you would like a more structured environment in terms of project, which might, and that leads to the next topic, there you might maybe rather want to apply to a position where the PI already has kind of an idea of where the project is going, or whether you're someone that wants really has their own research project that they want to pursue, and you do not really want to work in the context of a bigger project, then maybe applying for your own research grant might be a better idea.
Mm-hmm. And this also comes down to the next topic, or leads directly to the next topic. This is funding streams. So there are 2 ways to do a PhD, either to do a postdoc. Either you're working on somebody's project and this somebody is bringing the the funding, which is usually your PI, or you are working on your own project and you have your own funding. And this critically defines how you're looking for jobs, whether you are applying for grants and you write your own proposal and you look for labs where you think the environment would benefit how you can pursue this project and how you can bring this to a good end. If you want to work on projects which are interesting and exciting to you with other labs and you want to work on their projects, then you have to widen your search generally, because like the labs are distributed across the world.
Yes.
And it's hard enough to find a good lab, and it's hard enough to find a lab which fits your research interests and where you can actually continue developing your own interests and your own projects. But then also restricting this too much geographically might really be fatal, because you might end up only with 2 options of labs. And if this is a good fit or not is then, yeah, a question of luck and good fortune.
yeah, definitely. And a lot of research, right? So I think, do you want to next talk about what you should, do you want to talk about how to apply, how to find jobs first, or how to, like, what kind of research you should go to make sure you get the right job at the right location?
I think let's talk about location first, and then like the differences between applying for grants and applying for jobs.
Yes. So do you want to start with Europe?
Sure, why not? So depending on whether you're looking for labs in Europe or the US, or you're looking for jobs there, the search will be fundamentally different. Most postdoc jobs in the US are not even advertised. They are just sent around email lists, or people ask for recommendations among their PIs. So in order to get considered for these jobs, or even being able to apply for these jobs, you either have to follow these right people on Twitter or social media or the labs pages, or you have to
mailing lists sometimes, right? Very specific ones.
Yeah, or conference email newsletters, or you just write people directly. And it's very crucial to start with this early, so at least 1 year before you anticipate finishing up with your PhD, because the whole timeline of applying, getting the job, getting the visa and everything will take forever. And if they invite you to write or participate in writing a grant with them, this will also take much longer time until you can actually start with the job. So take this into account, that if you're not applying for a fully announced position, and you already have easy access to a visa in this respective country, you will need at least half a year from your acceptance date until you can start and get paid again.
And same goes for applying for grants in the US. So most actually US national funding schemes are only accessible to US citizens. So they might, so we are both not, so we can't really speak to that. But then there are other ways to go into the US. For instance, I did it with the Marie Sklodowska-Curie grant that has something called Global Fellowship that sends you abroad. Other options could be to have a European or Japan-based grant that allows you to go abroad for whatever, up to half of the time of your postdoc. So there's many options to apply for grants in the US from another country, but there the timeline might even be longer, because you first, usually with every grant, you just can't just apply for it, but you always have to do it together with your advisor, because grant agencies in general look at whether it's a good fit, whether it makes sense for you to go to a certain place. So then ideally, you know this person in advance to be able to apply for a grant with them together.
Yeah. So generally, my advice is, if you want to go to the US, network hard, be on the right email lists, and make sure you follow all the conference newsletters and follow the web pages, or when the lab is active on Twitter or on social media, follow them there, because the jobs are much more likely to be posted there than in any other official job forum. This is more, job forums are more used for assistant professorships or tenure jobs.
Yes.
In Europe, it's actually the opposite. So you can still find interesting jobs via email lists or following labs, but legal requirements make it imperative that a job is announced with a reasonable period on an official job forum. So usually, and this counts for most labs apart from Max Planck labs, funding as soon as somebody has funding and is looking for somebody, they have to post it. But it also means that technically, if they don't post that they have funding, they also likely don't have any. So this is very different because you don't network with an individual person via email and write them why you want to work with them and if there would be general interest in the future. This makes a lot of sense if you want to apply for a grant together, but your chances that the person actually has money and that you can like get a job by networking, if they turn you down, it's actually because they don't have funding and not because they are not interested in you, and they can't promise you a job on an email, or like they are ethically and legally bound to have a full application process with all applicants and can't give you the job via email and networking, no matter how much you're qualified and how much they like you.
Yes, yes, yes. And with regard to grants for Europe, actually, there's really quite a large amount because there's both what I just already mentioned, the kind of EU Commission, European Research Council funding schemes, which for postdoc right now is called Marie Curie grant, which gives you either 2 years within Europe or 3 years in total, 2 years outside of Europe and 1 year back. And then many countries have their own funding, like official country funding schemes. Germany would be the DFG, the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. The Netherlands would be NWO. And then, so there's many for many countries. And then there's also an abundance of smaller, more private grants per country, where usually the people in that country are very aware of them. So then it always, once you know someone you would like to work with, they can surely tell you some grant. So for instance, the grant I was first on in France is called Fondation Fusen, which is Monsieur Fusen, an industrial guy who just funds these postdocs. But I think almost everyone in our lab has had a Fusen grant, although I had never heard of it before, and I've not tried to Google search. It probably comes up, but it's not something that you would just think about immediately. And yeah, I think with a bit of Googling, just with the right keywords or on databases, I usually just line up many keywords like postdoc short, Japan grant or something, which now, and for this example, for instance, right after submitting my PhD, I found this niche grant from the Canon Foundation, which funds European researchers that want to go to Japan for up to half a year. So I just bridged the few months until my defense, where I was out of contract, by doing like a mini thing between my PhD and postdoc abroad, and did some nice research there. So I think there's always a good way to both find the big grants that everyone knows, but also these little niches for something that might just be right for you.
Yeah. And the little niche grants are also easier to get. So especially when you're very junior, it's hard to actually have a realistic chance for the big grants with Wellcome Trust or Marie Curie. But these smaller national grants are actually have a much higher acceptance rate. And even though the funding is shorter, it allows you to apply for a larger amount of funding or longer funding and position you in the field. And it looks fantastic on your CV, no matter how small the grant is.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And it's also fantastic for you because usually there's always a few months to bridge between things. Yeah. And then maybe I can just mention briefly the Japanese job market, because that's something I also happen to be familiar with. So there, actually, I think, especially if you're a foreigner, it's also much more likely that you will get a grant than a position that is advertised by a lab. So there are definitely positions advertised by labs, and they're also often advertised on little mailing lists, but often also more in Japanese than in English. So it really depends on lab composition. Mm-hmm. And then there's JSPS, the Japanese Society for the Promotion of Science, which is the equivalent of all the European funding agency I just mentioned, that have great funding schemes for postdocs that want to go to Japan. So that is definitely something to look into. They have kind of strict deadlines of 2 times a year or so, but that's the same for most grants. Also something to keep in mind. And then there's also a big research institute, for instance, the RIKEN Institute, which have their own postdoc schemes. And as always, there's also smaller grants, so it always helps to contact the lab heads.
Yeah. So to sum this up, it's very crucial that you know what you're looking for and what you want to try out, and then also to look specifically for this option and look into the specifics for this funding options you want, and also for the countries you're targeting. And if you have questions, or if you are unsure about something, also don't be afraid to reach out to people who are working in this environment or know this environment already. They usually have a lot of helpful resources, and being generally interested in this and asking for this is much more helpful in the long run than sending your typical application which is specific for your country but will never even be considered in your target country. So don't make the mistake and think Google will do the trick for you and you can actually do this all by yourself without help. Get help and have people proofread this for you, and ask this from people who actually know how to do this in a specific country.
Yes, which leads us, I think, to the next point. So how do I get the job once I've decided that you want a certain job or grant, right?
Yeah.
I think one thing that is very important is to have something published before you apply for your first grant, right? And yeah, we talked about that yesterday. So it's great if you have a Nature publication first, but if you don't, maybe don't try 5 very high impact journals, because before you get out your first publication, it's just important to tell people that you're someone that is able to put something out there, because many people are great at research, but then when it comes to writing up and following this timeline, I think we've all had that, they get a bit delayed. So it's really important to prove your full range as a functional researcher to have something out there.
Yeah, this is really something many people underestimate. It is absolutely crucial that you can show that you can bring a project from start to finish. And this you can only do with showing that you have at least one publication.
Yeah, a project is fine. You don't need 10.
Yeah, you don't need 10. Like for your first project, having one publication is enough. But before I had my first paper published, I wasn't even considered. While my CV, apart from this one publication, was technically the same.
Yeah.
But just having this one publication, and it doesn't even matter which journal, it's really, really crucial just to have. And if you just are a PhD student who knows in 1 or 2 years, I actually have to look for a postdoc position, publish your paper in a lower journal and just have it published and have something out, because otherwise it's really difficult. And also keep in mind that there are countries like the US where a PhD lasts easily between 5 or 7 years, other than in Europe, the 3 years. So people have much more time to publish things, and they are often working already for years as a research assistant in their lab. So when they come out of their PhD, they're almost already ready to be considered for tenure track positions because they have 7, 8 publications. Yeah. So in order to compete with them, even if your CV already shows that you only work for 3 years as an active researcher, be sure to show that you can publish. This is very crucial.
And yeah, so as I already said, I think many people overestimate the number of publications they need. And also, I think overestimate the impact factor, I think. I mean, for grant agencies, it's a bit different because often people that are not in your field judge it. So the only metric they have is actually the number of the publications, the impact factor. So for grants, I think actually more is often better in terms of the judgment of your CV. But especially if you apply for positions in labs, it's actually very possible that that the PI actually is very happy if you have published in a small but very specific journal that is very important for that field, or actually they read the article and if they think the content is great and fitting to the lab, they don't care about the impact factor or that you have only published one paper.
Yeah, agreed. So another thing is it's also very important to let people know you're looking. So don't only rely on things which are open in the public, but also let people who are in your network or people who can be helpful for you, let them know that you're looking for a job. This can be people who are your reading committee for your thesis. This can be your supervisor. Don't assume that your supervisor already knows that you're about to finish and keeps an eye open for your job. Tell them what you want to do next and ask them specifically to help you network and reach these jobs. And they can also email people they know and get you on the email list or forward you the jobs where you might not have access to otherwise.
Yes, definitely. So for me, for instance, I think one thing that is specific to the Netherlands, but for instance, with my advisor, we talked a lot about who we get on my committee, of my reading committee for my thesis. And of course, that's too late for your first postdoc, but because I did this bridging thing, actually it was enough time for my then afterwards supervisor in the US to be on my reading committee. And he asked me whether I would be interested to work with him later. So we applied for a grant together. So I think really also for your advisor and all the people in your community to know where you want to head, it's really invaluable because so much happens over connections.
Yeah. Same also in conferences. If you're presenting a poster or you give a talk, look for interpersonal interactions.
Yes. Or something. If you have the chance during your PhD, I think organizing a workshop, even co-organizing it with your advisor. So like, you know, a talk session, for instance, in a conference where you have several people on your topic, that is great because those are the people that you actually want to work with. Or, you know, participating in organizing a workshop at university, if there's some, those are great occasions to talk to these people.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
So, and this also comes to brings us to the next topic, which is visibility. Visibility is absolutely crucial, and you have to make sure that you're visible before you are a fully made researcher and you have the pedigree. So before you already graduate and before you have your PhD, and even if you don't have the self-confidence to do it, make sure you have some kind of representation, like a website, network, either on email lists, on social media, on conferences, and just you don't have to do all of these things, like one of them is usually fine or two, but make sure that you're visible and that people find you as an independent researcher. This is very crucial towards the end of your education or training as a PhD student, that you start to position yourself as somebody who is not only dependent on their advisor. Make your own website and not only have to be on the lab website. Have your CV, which is a bit more independent. Like, talk to people also about future projects and not only, oh, my advisor and me, we're doing this now and like we're heading towards this direction. You are now on your way to become an independent researcher, and it's very important that you also present yourself like this. Otherwise, people won't take you serious.
Yeah, definitely. Nothing to add.
Yeah.
So, and I think one more point, because we mainly talked about contacting people on PIs. So if you want to get a grant, I think what is really, really helpful, or actually crucial, is to have examples of previous grants that were accepted. So you really, really ask your PI or whoever around you that might have applied to this thing to get yourself grants, because it's just every grant has their specific way of being written successfully, and it's not very obvious. Even if every grant has instructions, you need to know what kind of people will read it. Like, I have had grants that are read by industrials. I have had grants that are read by, I don't know, I don't even know, people that were vaguely defined as scientists. So it's really, really important to know what you need to put into these grants. You have a restricted number of words, and also, even if you have great proposals, there are many people out there that have great proposals. So what is important is to excel on every little part of this proposal, right? Not only you need to have a great project, but you need to write it in a way that is appealing to the specific group of people that will be reading it. So for instance, there are some grants, this FUSEN one in Paris that I got, people from my lab knew that they like structured tables in there with a clear timeline, like very clear timeline of things, even though it's a bit reductionist, but this is the way that it was most understandable, of course, for people that are not necessarily in my field. Other grants like the Marie Curie, it's very important to also fill in the aspects of what you will be trained on, what kind of office conditions you will have. All these kinds of things matter a lot to them. And, you know, you get a minus point for everything that you didn't tick very well, that you didn't write up very well. So then even if you are above 100% in your research grant, you will still lose because there's other people that ticked every box.
Yeah, this is very true. And do you also have the feeling that applying for grants differs a lot by country, or is it more the specific agency?
I feel like it's more the specific agency, actually. Yeah. I mean, I've mostly applied for European grants, so I don't know, but I feel like for each of the ones that I've applied to, they were very different in nature. Yeah.
And when do you think is when is the earliest you should consider getting your own project funding, and when is the latest in your career trajectory where you should seriously work on this?
Well, I mean, I think earliest is actually really towards the end of your PhD is fine. I mean, even for my PhD, you know, I had the International Max Planck Research School grant, which is actually also a grant to work on your own project. Of course, you have more guidance than doing your postdoc, but I was also doing my own project. So I think, but there I think, well, during your PhD, I don't know whether this was the best thing. And I think a more structured program would not have been a bad idea either, but you know, it was fine. And then after that, I think it really depends on whether you think you're ready. You know, do you have an idea that you think, you know, you present it to people and, you know, you can get it like kind of a whole proof and people are like convinced of your idea and find it fine. And you think you can kind of pull it through, then apply for it. Because I mean, I did it immediately after my PhD and I never regretted it. But I know that other people, and for instance, for me, I think one factor is that I studied psychology and kind of stayed in the field of psychology my whole life. So I think I had a very good methods education from the start in terms of statistics. And I always worked as a research assistant at the Max Planck Institute when I was small a student. So I think I didn't have so much to catch up on. So that's why I think I felt ready for that very early on. And this is really regardless of whether you're brilliant or not at all. I think it's really a matter of what kind of skills you have got early on. So we're coming back to this skills being super important. But then other people, I think, Franziska, didn't you study linguistics first? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, if you study linguistics, then I mean, it's not like in a psychology curriculum where you have a lot of stats and a lot of like research methods education already. So there, it might be better to wait a bit longer with applying for your own funding. So yeah,
I agreed on this.
And latest in your career, you said, well, I mean, I think you can. I guess what was the question? How late you should do that in your career? You said,
like, what's the latest way you should? I actually think that like after your second postdoc is the very, very latest where you need to apply for your own funding.
Yeah. I would think so too. I mean, it depends on what you want to do later in life, right? But I think if you want to become a PI in a project, I think, that's a good point.
Yeah. One thing which really helped me, like navigating this whole job market thing and being on the market and looking for a job, was also to find external mentors and people who were interested in me as a person and as a researcher. They didn't necessarily have funding and opportunities for me to join their lab in any near future, but they were extremely helpful with like just navigating and guiding this process. And even though one of my advisors during my PhD was fairly absent during the first years, he was tremendously helpful in the last year where I was looking for a job and like helped me navigating the job market and like actually doing a good job applying and also looking and knowing where to look and how to apply for certain jobs.
So, definitely. I think mentors and advisors are great, but also actually having peer support is great. So my fellow cocktails tweeter, Christina, and we actually applied for this Marie Curie grant at the same time and basically wrote it together. I mean, not the project part, but all the other parts. And I mean, of course, we were applying for the same lab. So, you know, you're not in direct competition, but still, I think you could get into the spirit, but we did not. And it turned out great because we had like everything. I think we really reduced the workload a bit and like the fear of having written something wrong. I think because we both thought through every part of it, I think we both just got better. And I think the reason why we both got it is really because we actually had 4 eyes looking on it instead of 2.
Yeah, that's very true. And also keep in mind that when you're looking for mentors, like some people are more helpful for certain things than others. And everybody has their own expertise. So if you're planning to go abroad, your supervisor who has spent all their training in the same country might not be the best person to reach out to.
Yes.
So instead, email other people and ask for advice and try to also go to trainee sessions on conferences where they often have this. And then it's maybe not so important to follow the session, but talk to the people who are there to give advice and take advantage of that.
Definitely.
And a very important factor as well is to keep timelines in mind. This is both for grants as well. For applying for jobs, and just be sure that you start early. This is really I think a year before you graduate is the latest you should start looking for the job and think about it. So.
Yeah, definitely. And possibly before you get into the hot phase of writing up your PhD, I think it can be very helpful to know that you have already kind of made the ball rolling, right? I think it can be very reassuring, because otherwise it's something that is looming in the back of your head, and you know you have to start it. And even though you might not have, I think it's also really great. So what I sometimes do for grant deadlines is to just put them in my Google Calendar, because, you look at a website and then it's like 10 months away. And so, or it's not even in there, because usually once the deadline is closed, the next one will only be announced a few months ahead of the next deadline. So then I put in my Google Calendar just 4 months from now, check deadline for blah, blah, because otherwise you don't have it. And then I have it there and I don't have to think about not missing out. And this is very helpful in the process.
Yeah. So now let's assume you found this job announcement or the job you're really interested in and you want to have. So I think what also many young people or young researchers completely underestimate is how tailored your CV and cover letter have to be in order to actually get the job. And the more personal it is, the more chances you have to actually be considered for the position. And this is like not personal in the sense of like actually revealing personal information, but really motivating and writing a new cover letter. After I stopped copying and copy-pasting together bits and parts of different application letters and just writing it from scratch for exactly that position, while envisioning myself already being the happy recipient of the job offer, this actually pushed my invitation rate for job interviews for at least 200%.
Yeah. I think it's helpful to just imagine. I mean, so I was, for instance, during my PhD, I was on a committee for hiring a postdoc once, because there were also 2 students on the committee. And so I think it's helpful to just imagine that situation, right, where you are in your lab with your advisor and a few people from your lab looking through applications and choosing a person. So who will you choose? And I think this should be a guideline for how to write your application.
What did you learn from this? Like, what did people generally pay most attention to?
Well, I think what was very obvious was that it was very fast to only get like to 5 applications, right? It just went super fast in terms of, okay, these people just don't fit. And I think it was either people, I mean, sometimes you get a bit absurd application where clearly the person has misunderstood something, but also there are some that are kind of generic and where it's not really fit to the topic, even though they use some of our methods, but obviously there's always applications that are better tailored. And then I think it really boiled. So I think we did interviews with 3 or 4 candidates. And then I think, it was an interesting process. I think what did I learn? I think in the end, 2 or 3 of the people that were in the end loop would all have been great fits for the job. And it boiled down a bit on the distribution of our different weightings for different things, right? So some people weighted more really the thoroughness with which people had thought through everything. Others were more motivated, were like more looking at the enthusiasm of the person, which is of course also really important to drive a project. So I think it's also good to match that to the lab, right? So the majority thought, I don't know what it was, but that one skill was more important. So yeah. So I guess a take-home message from that is, even if you don't get a job, don't despair, because it is to a very large level. I think whether you get into a final selection depends on your skill level at that moment and the match to the position. But then in the end, there's usually a few candidates that are a really good fit, and there's factors that are more difficult to measure that are then the deal breaker or not.
Yeah, but the bottom line is also like, if you're not really a good fit and you're not super motivated to apply for that job and write a killer motivation letter, then don't even bother.
Yeah, definitely. It's a waste of time.
Yeah. And one last thing, which I think is absolutely crucial in order to be a happy postdoc and also long-term career prospects, I think for the postdoc, just as much as for the PhD, but you only learn this after you are already working as a PhD student for a few years. So this is usually too late to change something. But look for a PI who is a good mentor. You will need this. I don't think you can survive in academia without having at least one good mentor. And ideally, you already have a good PhD supervisor or advisor mentor, plus your postdoc advisor mentor. And
Definitely.
this will bring you a large deal in your future career, and this will also make your experience with the job and the environment. This will shape whether this will be a positive experience or a frustrating, depressing one.
Definitely, yeah. And in order to find that out, I think beforehand, of course, it's best if you have already talked to the person, but also try to talk to other people in that lab. And it might seem a bit weird at first. I first found these kinds of things a bit weird to just contact someone from the lab and ask about advice. But actually, I've been contacted a few times about that kind of thing by now, and I really understand it very well. And I'm always very happy to say a few words about whoever I'm working with right now, just to give them an idea of what kind of person they will be meeting.
Yeah, very true. And also check the publication list of your PI. If they are still publishing with people who were in the lab ages ago, and they still have productive relationships with each other, this is generally a good sign that this is a person which is good to work with. If you also see that there are some PhD students which have not been graduating in 6 or 7 years and are there since forever, this is also a sign for a very poor mentor, which has more interest in getting his own agenda done than having your career in mind.
Yes, so. And I think a very effective way also to ask about the atmosphere in a lab is just to mention to colleagues on a conference, oh, I saw a job advert for lab XY. I'm thinking of applying. And I mean, you usually get a lot of very honest responses on that kind of question. Yeah.
Very true. So yeah, and one last thing, don't take anything for granted, either in the application process, during the interview, or also in the negotiation of your job offer. There are a few things which really surprised me, because as a European, I just assumed that relocation costs, especially internationally, would be funded. This was not the case, and this hit me really hard in the beginning. Another thing which many people, especially when you're coming from Europe to another country, so in Europe we have really nice working laws which protect you from a lot of things, and also are very clear stated on your rights, like vacation days. This is something which is on postdoc stipends in the US, not necessarily specified, and this really depends on your PI. So this is something you need to talk about ahead, and this is something where you might be very, very naive upfront. So this is really something you should talk to other postdocs or people in the lab, but also the PI, and generally the employment conditions. Don't take anything for granted there, because you wouldn't believe how different employment conditions are across the globe.
Yes.
This, of course, doesn't matter if you have your own grant, because you can do whatever you want.
Well, not necessarily, because actually your grant is tied to depends on the grant, but if it's a good grant that is actually a real employment contract as opposed to just a stipend, you actually are tied, because the respective university is employing you, you are tied to their exact regulation. So it actually it's kind of the same. I mean, my salary was coming from France while I was in the US because of my specific grant, but still, I mean, I have to obey all the French laws, right? Including stupid things like paying Social Security and health insurance in France, although I'm actually in the US and I can't use it in the US, and so paying double, So you have to obey it. And for instance, the grant portion of my grant was in the US, so I actually had to obey the usual regulations at Penn as to what you could use the grant money for. Yeah. For instance, no wine at dinner, where the French, of course, have a different mindset. So,
yeah. But at the end of the day, you still could take, if you're on your own project, it's your business when you take vacation and when not, and how much.
Actually, no, because I am on an employment contract. So okay. I have exactly the same. I mean, I'm happy, luckily, because I have French vacation days, which I think are not very beatable. I don't even know what to do with all of those. But but no, actually, I think it depends. I think it's really only if you have a stipend, but a stipend is actually not a good thing, right? Because you usually don't get Social Security and all of that. Then people don't care. But I think most grants, they implement it in a way that you just get the money from an external source, is exposed from the professor, but it actually is under exactly the same rules as every other employment contract in that country. So I also have to put my vacation days into the database of my university.
All right. Well, I learned that now.
Yeah.
Will be helpful for the future.
Yeah. I mean, of course, I think here, because I'm not obliged to a professor, I guess, of course, with the grant, you feel more flexible because I don't know. I mean, if I want to work from home, I work from home, and my advisor, I think, has less leverage over to tell me whether that's okay or not. But I think officially, the working hours and the vacation days are actually subject to the same things as with every other employment contract.
Yeah. Okay. I think I said everything I wanted to say, and
yes. Yes, I think we've covered everything, and yeah, I mean, I think with good preparation, because the theme was a bit being a happy postdoc. I think with good preparation and research, I think it's very very possible to get a postdoc position that you really like if academia is something that you want to pursue. And I think also after PhD, I think a PhD is still a learning phase. And after that, you really have to ask yourself, okay, if I do this, under which conditions am I okay to do this, right? And of course, in academia, if you work more, you'll always be more successful, because that's just how the game goes. I mean, roughly, I think it's true. But then, and there will always be people that work harder than you, that work more than you, that are better than you. But the thing is, I think you just have to know which conditions are fine for you. And for instance, I work much less after my PhD than in my postdoc, because I've just determined for me, I don't want to become a workaholic. I will only do this academia thing if I can do it with the working hours that allow me enough sleep and enough free time. And it has worked out well so far. But I think after your PhD, because you get more independent and flexible, it's really important to set yourself your own boundaries. And that's also your responsibility.
Absolutely agree on this. And it's also partially your responsibility to place yourself in an environment where you can actually pursue your personal goals, or what you actually want to have from that job. Yes. And the nicest thing is, and this is what was my motivation, or what convinced me the most when I decided that I try a postdoc instead of leaving academia, was really just knowing that in case this really sucks and I don't like it, I can go anytime. Nothing stops me from this. My degree is not jeopardized. I can just go wherever I want. I can make a new start, and I can just give it a try. And either I like it and it works under the conditions which I set myself, or it does not.
Yeah.
And working 60 to 80 hour weeks every week is just not part of this. Yeah. So, and you just don't have these weird deadlines that you need to do this, and otherwise your degree might not work out, or your supervisors might be mad. You still have deadlines, and it's still tough, but it's very, very different. And your salary is much more matched to the living costs, which is also a nice thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So really, if you apply for a postdoc, everything you can to make it a happy postdoc.
Yeah. Agreed on this, and it's possible. So I think this is the bottom line of this whole thing. It's you don't have to be that miserable, and it's actually pretty fine. And it's so far the most fun part of my academic experience. So
it is.
I am happy to extend this as long as I possibly can before I get more responsibility.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Sho, for joining today. This was very interesting. And I hope to see you in the future sessions of Academic Crisis Line. The next one is a break because I'm on vacation. I will see you then after this, and I will announce the date on my website, and of course on Twitter. And go to my website, vote for new topics, and especially if you're interested in participating in the Academic Crisis Line in the future, please get in touch. I wish you all a great week, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye.